Welcome to the Center for Universal Oneness. We are an open, welcoming, spiritual community that supports all faith traditions and invites you to join us on your spiritual journey. We host different speakers each week to guide and inspire us. We are guided by universal principles of acceptance of all that is sacred, and we strive to live in the oneness of love. Please enjoy this presentation.
We have a speaker that I think everyone's familiar with, Dr. Jude LaClaire. She's got 50 years plus of helping people within our own group. I think she has helped many of us on a personal level, and just as a wealth of wisdom. I think with her counseling, she also does this life weaving education curriculum, problem solving way, and writes a monthly article in Evolving Magazine. So she's continuing to work as a counselor and writing and thinking and contemplating and just being willing to share with us what's on her mind this morning, and we're grateful for that. So Dr. Jude, please.
Morning, everybody. Hope you're all well. And I was telling them, you may notice I have eyes. I had a eyebrow lip surgery. So if you notice a little, these are not fake eyebrows. They're just incisions. But I do see way better now. My field of vision. So now I can tell you, I see clearly now. Hopefully it's the inner seeing, right? That's what we're all trying to do here, aren't we? Right? So when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about, you probably know, I really do spend weeks and hours thinking about these things and reading, and because I know you all are very well read and you're very much into so many things. So I'm talking to people who are up on things and think more deeply. So I'll just share with you some of my process and what things have inspired me. The topic we're talking about is really, who am I? So what kind of triggered me into thinking about this was during June, which as you all know is Pride Month. We're one of the groups that get a month. As I've heard other people say about being Black or Hispanic or Asian, it's like, we'd like to have a whole year, thank you. But a month at least brings it to the forefront. I watched this 6-part series on Nat Geo on LGBT history from the 50s to the present. And it was very interesting with some small amount of new information. And I'm real happy that these kinds of programs are out there to inform and educate people about what I would think is a mostly unknown history of this population. But as a member of this group, I came out at age 35 in 1977. I was a little disappointed and realized really that every story is told from a particular perspective, and much of the story they were telling was not my story. And I began to think about each person having their own experience of how history is made in their personal sphere. And I began thinking about the experience for myself, discovering my sense of self and my sense of identity in relation to my sexual and lifestyle expression, which is one part of my being. And it opened the door to thinking about other aspects of my personal history. And I think you all know this, that anytime we're going through difficulties, challenges, transitioning through a developmental stage or experiencing change or loss, we're really catapulted into a life review. I know you've all experienced that probably way more than once. So we look at the family and relational difficulties or health challenges, loss of loved ones, sometimes job or career challenges, retirements, and just the long list. And then we think about the sea in which we swim. There are those myriad political and social roller coasters that we're on, these ongoing legal and financial issues of the day. Some of us are reeling from the Supreme Court decisions on Roe v. Wade and gun laws or lack thereof. Some also, we know that there's inflation and housing shortages. There's a long list. So here you are in the midst of your personal process in the societal sea. So our personal history is inseparable kind of from these societal events. And this demands two things from us. One is to be more aware of our own personal history. And the other is to see our lives thriving in the environment in which we find ourselves. So this personal history is kind of, I'm sure, as I said, I know you've done this many times. We look at where we've been, we look at where we are, and then of course, we're kind of thinking about where are we going. So one article I read was kind of talking about Rilke. And so I looked up some of his poems and I found this beautiful poem about this, describing this in a poetic way. It's called As Once the Winged Energy of Delight. As once the winged energy of delight carried you over childhood's dark abysses, now beyond your own life, build the great arch of unimagined bridges. Wonders happen if we can succeed in passing through the harshest danger, but only in a bright and purely granted achievement can we realize the wonder. To work with things in the indescribable relationship is not too hard for us. The pattern grows more intricate and subtle, and being swept along is not enough. Take your practiced powers and stretch them out until they span the chasm between two contradictions, for the God wants to know himself in you, or maybe herself. So kind of as we look at our childhood, the subsequent times of growth and development, it's helpful to look at, say, themes of defining moments or people or interests or activities that we come back to in various ways, those repetitive patterns. One of the requirements for my application to my doctoral program when I was 52 was to write an autobiography of my personal, educational, and professional history. And this was really quite difficult and took me many months to complete. But when I did, I was really amazed to see the recurring themes and interests. And it makes me think about where I was in my life emotionally and relationally and with my life choices. So I'm asking you to think about your personal history as you experienced it. So, because each of us comes from our own perspective of what kinds of things. It's very interesting. I like to learn about history, but I'm very struck by the fact that fairly often it's very subjective and or only has a particular thing that it focuses on, which I find very interesting. And people now we know that have lived through, that we have a few people from World War II and certainly from the Vietnam War and so on. My parents lived through two world wars, the Great Depression and every other, but we have some people who are alive who went through things that we only read about or hear about. And then some of us are getting old enough to to see that, that there's this, history being told. And again, you look at it and you say, well, wait a minute, that's not how I experienced it, right? So I think it's very important to know that people are writing history and they have a perspective. So I think it's important for you to think about your life as you experienced it. So what I would say is that one way to think about this is writing a memoir. And some of you may have any of you done this already? Or are you doing it? Well, here's what I would say to you. I really would encourage it. And so I did a little diving on the difference between, say, a memoir and an autobiography. So a memoir is part of your story, a collection of experiences or memories or events. It's not an autobiography, but it's looking at themes, lessons you've learned, and perhaps can share with others. It's storytelling. and everyone's story is different. So this can be very helpful and enlightening as you review your life through this different lens. And as some of you are certainly aware that one of the programs that helps people ask questions to begin to tell their story is a program called StoryCorps. I'm sure you've seen that on PBS. Oftentimes they have short parts of interviews that are animated, and you hear these bits of people's stories, but they're storing all of these. And it's a great vehicle to help people remember different aspects of their life and tell them that so their history is not lost. We don't want to lose these histories. So there are wonderful lists of questions on their website, which I'll give you in a little bit, to help you get started. So they have questions for everyone. Like, here are some of the questions that, can you tell me about the important people in your life? What are you proudest of? When in your life have you felt most alone? Is there any wisdom you'd want to pass on to generations living years from now? What would you want them to know? Is there anything you want to tell that you have never talked about? And I can tell you that as a therapist, I've had people come into my office at 40s, 50s, even 60s, having never told certain things about their lives, never really talked about them to anyone. What would you, if you could talk to a younger version of yourself, what would you say? Perhaps we say them to our kids or other folks, but what is that, from that place of wisdom, from that place of experience? So as you think about these questions, maybe maybe memories are being triggered to get you to kind of think about these things flooding in. So also on the website StoryCorps, so the website is just StoryCorps, StoryCorps, storycorps.org/participate/great questions. If you go to the site, you'll find the questions. So there's a lot of other questions too. So like I said, if you're thinking about this, just because I think every single one of you should think about sharing your unique and amazing journey. It's not unimportant. And I don't care if you have kids or not. I just think it's important. And I think it's a good exercise also just for us. I don't know about you, but I still have days when I think, well, what the heck have I done? What am I doing, Jude? And I'll be 81 in September. And it's like, oh goodness, what have I accomplished? What have I done, with my life? And there are days when I feel like not much. And so when I do things like this, and also one of the things I do with people when I'm talking with them is I share aspects of myself that I think might be helpful for them. And that's a good exercise for me, and it helps them to think about themselves and their struggles or difficulties and how they got through them. So here are some of the other lists of questions on different topics that you might relate to, because you may have different parts of your life that may feel more important to you. So think about the topic of, say, friends or colleagues, grandparents. I didn't have any well, I had grandparents, I didn't know any of them, but some of you did. Perhaps I did not. Raising children. Some of you have kids, some don't. We all have our own specific story about that. Some of us aren't having adult children, we're still raising children, aren't we? So it never stops. Ever. My daughter's 48 years old. I mean, she's there for me, but I'm also still there for her. So it never ends, does it? Never. Parents, sometimes a mixed bag for a lot of us. Growing up, all the various aspects of your growing up. Schools and teachers, our educational process, whatever that gave us or required of us. Love and relationships, big one, big topic for most of us. Our relational journey. working, our calling, our careers, what have we done with our energy to, you know, in our lives. I think they said religion, but I think of it more as each one's personal journey, their spiritual journey, their spiritual quest. Serious illness for ourselves or those we care about, losing someone close to us. I know some of you have had grievous losses. I think since I last spoke with you, my niece in Chicago, who's like 46, lost her husband. He was age 50. He got sick, some sort of encephalitis, and in 3 weeks he was gone. And he has a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. So my niece is now a widow at 46 with 2 children. We don't know, do we? And all of you, I know, have experienced your own set of losses. Our family heritage, or perhaps we've served in the military. So thinking about your story can be a great way to look at where you've been and where you are. So that kind of gets me to this other part of it, is where are we going? So for many of us, that's really overshadowed by the environment in which we live. And much of what I have to say now may not be new to you, but perhaps a reminder. So as I was going through my own struggle with current affairs, one thing I was kind of, as I know some of you may have been, I was kind of in my own, I think, depression and about it all. And I decided to rewatch this documentary on consciousness that was looking at the research studies on using like ketamine, psilocybin, LSD, et cetera, to help people with deep depression, OCD, trauma, et cetera. And this is consistent in all the research, that the participants consistently felt a change in how they looked at life by going into this wider, boundaryless state of consciousness. You know what I'm talking about. The problems of life seem inconsequential in the light of that bigger experience. So it reminds us, and I know you all know what I'm talking about because that's what your whole thing is about, universal oneness, is how do we allow ourselves to stay kind of grounded, but at the same time to be in that bigger space, that boundaryless space. While I was, about a week ago, as I'm going through thinking about all this, I had this kind of amazing dream, and I've been sort of, I pay attention to my dreams, but I'm off and on about it. And I had a dream, and in this dream, there was a gigantic giraffe, which I hadn't seen anything at all recently about giraffes. It was not on my conscious mind. And here is this giant giraffe, which I do love giraffes. They're just so amazing. And its neck and head, it was so tall that its head was reaching, which I don't know that this is even possible, reaching above the sky. And I thought, wow, okay. But its feet are on the ground, right? So I thought, okay, because I'm thinking a lot about how going into this big consciousness, right? This other place of being helps us to be here better, right? So sometimes I have the same feeling looking at pictures of space. And the new ones from the James Webb Telescope, I haven't seen very many of them. Have you any of you seen them? They're just, I mean, it's astounding. They had images of galaxies that are billions of years away from us. To me, this is really kind of life-changing to even to just allow yourself to say, oh my goodness, look at that. This is the light from stars that are before the Big Bang. What? You know, so it's like we talk about words, the beginningless, you know, path, the end, you know, the endless future. There is no boundary. And so I think the only way we're going to swim in this stuff that we're in is also maybe be like that giraffe, right? That to have our part of ourselves being aware of that oneness, that big picture, the boundaryless place where that what all experiences near death and everything, it's love. It is. That's your philosophy. So I'm going to read this other Rilke poem, which I liked. It's called Buddha in Glory. And it kind of, I think, summarizes your mission, your vision. Center of all centers, core of cores, almond, self-enclosed and growing sweet, all this universe to the furthest stars, all beyond them is your flesh, your fruit. Now you feel how nothing clings to you. Your vast shell reaches into endless space, and there are the rich, thick fluids rise and flow, illuminated in your infinite peace. A billion stars go spinning through the night, blazing high above your head. But in you is the presence that will be when all the stars are dead. So I just think poetry sometimes helps us to reach into that space, right? So I believe this helps us as we think about creating our future. One of the articles that I read recently also just absolutely, to me, was kind of stunning. It's in the July 10th New York Times Magazine. Perhaps some of you saw it. It's an interview of Krista Tippett, who evidently, I didn't recognize her name. Perhaps some of you do. She's been on NPR, I guess, for like 20 years. And David Marchese, who's a writer for the New York Times, it was interviewing her. And it kind of gave me a lot to contemplate. And I'm going to share some of this with you. So in responding to a question about self-identity in her work, as she talked about those who what she called shed light on, and I love this phrase, generative possibilities and robust goodness. Generative possibilities and robust goodness. And she spoke about people like Jane Goodall and John Lewis, and perhaps you have your own, we all have our heroes and heroes, who had what she called muscular hope. Muscular hope. So that doesn't sound wishy-washy, does it? Right? So she uses the phrase generative possibilities. And she says, and I quote, all over the place in every community and field of endeavor, there are people who are working generatively with the challenges and realities. That landscape is as real and important as the landscape of everything we can point out as failing and corrupt and catastrophic. Let me say that again, because I think that's really deep and beautiful and helpful to me. All over the place, in every community and field of endeavor, there are people who are working generatively with the challenges and realities. That landscape is as real and important as the landscape of everything we can point out as failing and corrupt and catastrophic. Okay, so I think many of us feel like we're in a very dangerous point of history. But I think in any historic moment, I'm fascinated, of course, and I'm sure many of you are, by people who have risen to the occasion in their way to make a change. You know, during World War II, and I was watched this movie, and it was about these women spies who were just ordinary, everyday people who went to France and became, infiltrated the resistance and helped with the resistance. And many of them died. Some of them returned to England. There were those in the French resistance. So I think there were, I always talk about Viktor Frankl. So when things are really the toughest of the tough, things seem like there's no light. There's, as I said, the words that she used, failing, corrupt, and catastrophic. What can we do? What can we do? And so she talks about the true nature of vitality, again, which this is so much what you all are embracing, is based on mutuality and reciprocity. So think about that in your everyday life, how you can kind of foster that sense of mutuality and reciprocity, okay? It's what you're about, isn't it? It's what you know, it's what you believe. You know, I think it's as small as how do you treat people at the grocery store? Do you get all nasty in traffic? How do you and of course, who are the people we often get the worst with? Are the people we live with often. And so it's like, I think that's where we live, isn't it? We live in that everyday life. We live, that we all do. Some of you have done and will do and are doing amazing things more in the public world. I've never felt like I had anything really big to offer. I kind of just do my daily thing. I do what I do and I just keep kind of doing it. I don't think there's any history that's going to write down what I've done, but that's not the point because most of us aren't going to be in history books. Maybe some of you will be, but even those who are know that everybody's part of this process, aren't they? You're part of the process. Every moment you're part of the process, kind of part of the solution, as they say, or part of the problem. So she talks about our present reality. She says it's terrible in a lot of ways and full of unbelievable possibilities. So I like it when I see somebody doing something creative about the environment, doing something different to save different animals or plants or bugs or butterflies or whatever, or doing something I have a client that lives in Israel, and he was talking about the fact that they have lots and lots of desalination plants. They're absolutely doing what we haven't done yet very much, and that is they're converting seawater because they live in a desert. So some of these things we don't hear about. I'm sure some of those things you do, and perhaps you can share some of those with us. What are those possibilities? They're all small things to some degree, aren't they? So she says to us, and I love this, and this is, I think, what we can think about ourselves. She tells us there is I'm quoting her, space to move below the radar and start stitching together relationships and quiet conversations at a very human level. We're going to work on quiet conversations that will not be publicized. That feels to me like a power move in the world. To me, that's very powerful to think about, isn't it? She tells us there's a space to move below the radar and start stitching together relationships and quiet conversations at a very human level. We're going to work on quiet conversations that will not be publicized. That feels to me like a power move in this world. If you can go online and find this article, it just seemed like a powerhouse to me. The way she framed some of these things and her experience of interviewing so many people over the years, and obviously thinking about them herself. And it spoke to me greatly because sometimes it's so easy to feel powerless. It's so easy to feel defeated. It's so easy to feel like we don't matter. And the fact is, you know this, and I'm just going to remind you and remind each other, everything we think and say and do creates a reality and creates a difference. And one person can change a community, can change a world just by what you're doing here and what you're doing here, right? Where is your heart? And so I guess what I'm saying to you is just to remind you, I said, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But I need reminding. This article just really, really spoke to me. And she also talks, I think we're doing in the present moment with our lives, which some of you have done your full lives. She said, she talks about thinking about our lives, finding our calling. It may not be a career, it may not be anything we do for money, but it's a calling, it's something you do. She says that gives you joy. Maybe you're never going to get paid for it. It can be how you show up through your day, how you treat strangers. It's a thing that amplify your best humanity. So I think that, again, this is nothing new. You all know this. She reminded me. Okay. And then she says at the end of the article, she says, the notion of living with the questions in a world that is in love with answers. And I know you know this when she says, like, living your way into the answer. It says, doing justice to a question means that you cannot rush to an answer. What you're called to do is hold the question itself, dwell with the question respectfully, and love the question. Live your way into the answer. If you hold a question, if you're faithful, the question will be faithful back to you. Isn't that just, it's a great way, isn't it, of saying that? So I highly recommend this article in New York Times, July 10th. So I'm gonna, I do kind of look at Facebook every now and again, but lately it seems like a lot of the people that I know on Facebook are posting inspirational thoughts. And so one of the women, I think you may know her, Maggie Feinfrock, you know her, she's been around a long time in the community. Anyway, she had posted this from Stephen Jay Gould, and some of you may know who he was. He was an evolutionary biologist, and he wrote, I loved his writings. He used to write articles for the Natural History magazine. Some of you heard Jay Gould, Stephen Jay Gould. He's deceased now. Anyway, he wrote this, and I think it's quite applicable. He says, good and kind people. He wrote this after 9/11, by the way. Good and kind people outnumber all others by thousands to one. The tragedy of human history lies in the enormous potential for destruction and rare acts of evil, not in the high frequency of evil people. Complex systems can only be built step by step, whereas destruction requires but an instant. This is what I like to call the great asymmetry. Every spectacular incident of evil will be balanced by 10,000 acts of kindness, too often unnoted and invisible as the ordinary efforts of a vast majority. We have a duty, a holy responsibility to record and honor the victorious weight of these innumerable acts of kindness when an unprecedented act of evil so threatens to distort our perception of ordinary human behavior. So again, what does it do? It reminds us, right, what we have, what we're doing, what really the majority of people are doing, and how powerful it is. So as I kind of to round up here, we're just talking about thinking about your life, where you've been, what you've learned, thinking about perhaps writing about it. And then that's the springboard for where you go, right? Where we're going now. Many of us are in what they call Act 3. I guess some of us are already in Act 4. I don't know. We're moving right down the line here, aren't we? So it's like, okay, so what am I going to create in this, maybe for me, the last act of my life? I mean, I might live to be 90, 100. I don't know. Could die tomorrow. But who knows? But I want to ask myself, Jude, what are you going to do? Because you're a different person in some ways than what you were before, and in some ways you're the same person. So you each are your own person who has your own story, and you are creating your own future, which is also attacked, as you said, that oneness of all things, isn't it? Your change makes it change for everyone else, right? So as I said, I'm not saying anything new to you, but I found some people that I thought expressed it in ways that were inspirational to me and helpful to me to kind of reframe my way of looking at things right now. Okay. So let's just take a moment here to reflect. All right. So if you want to just close your eyes, if that's comfortable, and take a nice deep breath into the diaphragm. And just slowly, slowly let it out. And continue to take those nice deep breaths. And your whole body is just feeling warm and heavy and relaxed. Your body just giving into gravity. Your body is calm, relaxed. Your mind is alert and awake. You have all the time you need. And as you listen to some of the thoughts today, is there anything about your life that came to mind? Are you listening to what parts of you may need to be remembered? Perhaps you remember your forgotten dreams. Perhaps you remember when you did something kind or courageous or strong. Thank that part of you. You may remember times when you struggled, those questions, those experiences that you lived through. When you found your way through, maybe it took time, perhaps even years, but you got through it and you learned from it. Think about this older what this older